Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Shows, where we add value to people's lives, happening every Wednesday and Thursday on ebritzradio.com. You can catch the Lunchtime Shows on all your major podcast channels. And to help us grow the channel, please follow, like, and share with everybody today. Guys, we are back with one of our resident coaches. She's always, she hasn't been here for a while, but now she's back to come chat to us. She's the human and talent-centered strategist, executive coach, agile people advocate, and HR leadership and leadership expert, Anja van Beek. Anja, welcome back to the Lunchtime Series. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Kevin?
Good. It's good to see you.
Yeah, lovely to be back.
So, Anja, when you mentioned this topic of discussion, I was like, I've seen it everywhere, and I was like, what is this stuff? What is this? And then I went and did some research, and I was like, what a brilliant conversation to have, because I think people they're hearing it, but they're not quite understanding it. So I'm glad that we're going to be unpacking it. And I found some information on Forbes, and Forbes.com is my sort of go-to, because it's very credible, the information they share. And they start with the great resignation, the great reshuffle, the big quit, the great rethink, quiet quitting, ghost quitting. It doesn't matter what you want to call it. The events over the past few years have caused employers to reflect on their role of work in their lives, and in some cases to take action, or in other cases, quiet quitting and inaction. They're taking a new look of work's impact of their on their fulfillment of what makes work meaningful, and they're asking themselves what they really want from their professional lives. And the topic we're talking about, guys, is the quiet quitting. And yeah, like when you mentioned that, I was like, yes, this is a good conversation, and there's so much to it. Why did you want to talk about this? Why do you think this is a key topic of discussion?
Yeah, I think, Kevin, exactly like you said, quiet quitting is the latest buzzword, and everyone is talking about that. And I think the concept in itself is not necessarily new. I do recall when I was HR director in my previous role, we did employee surveys. And one of the areas that we found is that there was a group of colleagues that we called trapped employees, because they were not loyal to the brand. They were actually at the work, but they did not want to be there. And I think in not that specific way, but if we think of people being in action, as you've used the words, I think is so relevant, especially as you've mentioned, we've seen the great resignation, people questioning, what is the meaning I get from my work experience? What is the meaning I get from the job that I'm doing? And I think so unfortunate, the quiet quitting, people being at work, but they actually don't want to be there, or they're doing the bare minimum. And I think it's relevant for not only managers, but employers as well, to say, can I see a little bit of myself in there? And what can you do differently to move forward?
Like you say, this is not something new. The only difference that I think has occurred in the last few years is the fact that as employees have come to a point when they've started questioning, why am I here? What am I doing here? Do I want to be here? Because we've had the wonderful pandemic to shake us up a bit and kind of go, is this your life? Is this it? And I think everyone's really starting to ask that question. But to a large degree, I think a lot of South Africans, and I am making a generalization here, but I find that a large group of South Africans find themselves in this position where they're just simply at a job because it is a job, and because there aren't many opportunities, we're just here because we have to be, and it's a salary. And I think there's a catch-22 here. And, globally, it's slightly different, but speaking to South African audience, if we look at South Africans, or Africa for that matter, it's not like we have, a job of a choice, flying in my direction because the unemployment rate is so high. It is also quitting quietly, but also, I don't have much options. So I think, for us, there's a catch-22 there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what is so unfortunate is whenever someone think of the term quiet quitting, I think what comes to mind, and I've heard managers having those conversations before, is that I almost want to say, think it's about that individual that's not motivated and they don't necessarily want to put their energy and their effort into the work. And it's not necessarily that. I think there might be so many different aspects. You've mentioned the pandemic that we just went through, the wake up call that people say, this is what, working life is all about. But then also, as we see the need for the flexibility, and I was in a conversation recently, and I was quite surprised how some employers are still, even though that people can work from the office, or not from the office, work from home, and now returning to the office. And it's almost as if they miss that, let's focus on the employees and understand what they want, and how can we then build this almost, I want to say, culture where people can be happy. Because I think if you think of quiet quitting on the one side, it might be, do I find meaning in my work? But also, do I have the flexibility that I know can work? Or am I required to go back to the office? And then I think the third one, or the third part there, is, do I have the relationship with my manager that is supporting me to, get to my goals? So I think it's such important aspects to consider when we think of that concept.
And never mind the fact that there's a war and the petrol price and all the external factors that add to the pressure. A lot of people are kind of going, but for 2 years we had to just get it right and we had to just make it happen. Why would you now want me to have to spend money again to wake up at 4 o'clock to catch a taxi, or to be in time for my work? And people travel, especially in South Africa, people travel vast sort of distances just to be and at their workplace. And I think a lot of employers are not considering that we're in a time in our lives, in our world, where everything needs to be considered differently. And that means, HR policies need to change, leadership needs to change, our approaches need to change. And how we do this really is either going to make or break your business, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, it's not the topic today, but I just want to mention, when you use the word changing HR policies and implementing work from home policies or flexible working hours, whatever it might be. Something that I have not considered recently, and I think that's quite an interesting one, because I don't think we have all the answers. Is, let's say the workforce are working from home. What about that health and safety regulations, where you say, as an employer, it's my responsibility to make sure you have a safe workspace. But if you at the home, do you have the natural sunlight that you need? From a health and safety perspective, who's making sure that you're not sitting behind the desk the whole time? I think me and you spoke about that concept of self-management. So there's such a big point on self-management. But back to the topic of quiet quitting, I think it's so unfortunate when we do look at that and say, it's only the motivation from that employee. That's the reason why they quiet quitting. But can you imagine having a workforce, say a team of 10, and majority of them not being there? I mean, they're there, but they're doing the bare minimum to make sure, they cover what they're supposed to cover.
But part of this also speaks to, it's personal attitude, right? So, and I think we have so much that's working, well, depending on how you focused on it and depending on what you pay attention to, there's so much that could be working against you in your work environment currently, right? With all the factors that we've already mentioned. But I think for today's conversation, what I'd like to leave with people is, how do we actually start paying attention to the quiet quitting phenomenon that might be occurring right in front of us, and what do we need to start doing about it, right? And I think it all again stems back to self-management, self-leadership, leadership as a whole. And I think leaders in itself need to start taking a different approach. Right? Long gone are the days that people care about what your title is. It's just unimportant. People people are at that point where they really don't care. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do. I'm just here to do my job. So thanks for sending your nice little email or whatever. Let me get on with it. And that whole, I'm your boss, you're supposed to listen to me. That narrative, that frame, that viewpoint needs to literally, it's literally a paradigm shift where leaders need to be able to sit down one-on-one and actually go, so tell me about who you are and what motivates you. And I mean, we have a beautiful human needs analysis that we do for when we go through coaching practices with people. And just to understand, from a human needs perspective. So do I need certainty in my job? Do I need significance in my job? Do I need growth in my job? What do I as an individual need for me to want to be here? Right. Yeah. And I think that's where it really starts. It starts with leadership changing the approach to what employees need.
Yeah. And I think what comes to mind when you talk about that is understanding that intrinsic motivation. Yeah. Because we know as a manager or as a leader, I can't necessarily motivate you. I can create the environment for you. Yeah. And we can talk about it, some tips there as well. But I think the first point is, as you say, making time to connect with you and understand where you're coming from. And I was quite surprised. I'm currently busy with a leadership development program where when we focus on the first lesson, and the first lesson was really about, that how can I be a motivational leader? But the biggest insight for majority of the leaders said, Anja, you know what? I'm communicating with my team, but I actually don't know them. I don't know what's important to them. I don't know what are their drives or their goals from a personal perspective as well. And I was actually quite surprised to hear these left brain, if I can call them, I don't want to box people, but I mean, analytical, logical thinkers actually acknowledge that there's a need for people to understand that and to connect with that. And I think that's awesome. So that shift that you mentioning is definitely happening.
Someone coined it the other day quite interestingly, in a way that it made sense immediately. And she's the head of a learning and development department. And she said, you know what, sometimes you need to step into big sister role, and you need to put that title on the side there and be a big sister. Yeah. And I was like, that's exactly the point. It's not like you need to become people's family. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying you need to be human, a human first, for you to be able to have that connection. Yeah. The other one that sort of stands out, and doing some research on this, is involving teams, right? And I think a large part of why people quit is that they don't have a sense of belonging. They don't have a sense. I mean, I was looking at the human, some of the stats from the World Economic Forum, and one of the biggest findings, at 66%, people truly want to be themselves, seeking to belong. Right, at 66%, that's what the World Economic Forum sort of shows it, and I'm sure in South Africa that might be even higher, right? But and a large part of that is the teams in silos. There's so many silos created in big corporates that it's us against them. They even use that kind of language. This team, the claims team is not the same as the sales team. We got a whole bunch of. They'll create little groups. But as soon as you get people to start connecting and kind of involve teams, it also helps with clarity and feeling like I belong, feeling like I have an opinion, feeling like I matter, right? It changes how, when people are involved, they respond differently.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think just to highlight what you said, that sense of belonging, I call it social safety. And social safety simply means that people want to know that, I'm part of this. I'm part of a bigger, responsibility or bigger dream, if you want to call it as such. And I think that is why, for me, if you think of the purpose of the organization, it's critical, because I always say the purpose is that invisible leader that you can use to your advantage. But I think, to your point, that if we see these silos, and again, another client that I work with, they have this beautiful mission and vision and even values against the wall. But I mean, what, again, as you say, what's the narrative that I hear? Yes, it's there. We know what it stands for, but we're not seeing it in action. And again, that silo mentality, as you say. So cross-functional team, I think is critical. Even if you think of the concept of boundary spanning, and boundary spanning simply means that who do I connect to that is not, part of my immediate network. And this can now either be within the organization, perhaps within your department, but also in the industry that you're working in, and expanding that boundaries, to learn from one another. But exactly, that sense of belonging is critical.
Another one that Forbes points out, which is a really interesting one, and I've been saying this for you. I mentioned, like on a previous show before, I said I can't wait for the day that corporates start integrating learning as part of their core skills and their core value system, right? And they mention, provide time for learning, and I think, I'm working with a large insurer at the moment, and we're going through a very specialist leadership program. And the key number one thing that comes up is, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. So yes, do they know how to manage their attention? And do they know how to have that and self-manage themselves for that? Or are we just not making it part of our DNA as an organization? Right, that we don't provide you time for learning. Providing time for learning means you have to do it in your own time. And I think part of the growth of an organization today means that when someone is growing and you're allowing for time for the growth within your organization, you're doing stuff that other organizations are not doing, which puts you in the forerun, or the running of what the future is going to look like. And I think providing learning time is such a big thing that corporates need to also. It's a paradigm shift.
Yeah. And you know what I have seen, Kevin, especially in the agile HR work that I'm doing, is that some people do have time for learning. But what we now see is that the need has changed. It's not 2 days in classroom anymore. That's just not working, even though we can do it virtually. But it's really that chunk, bite size type of learning, obviously interactive, using technology where possible. So it's not only providing me with the time, but also the technology in such a way that I can get the most. Because, I mean, we don't have the luxury of, 2 days back to back in class anymore, or perhaps not the only way of doing that. And I think that is, again, why coaching and mentoring is such a big focus, because that's almost like on the job training that's happening there.
I agree, and I think that's speaking to we've spoken about before, stepping from leader to coach role, and having that ability to do that. I think it leads to my very next point here, that we have to start prioritizing soft skills in the work environment. We know that as much as we have hard skills, and I know as much as we've had this conversation, people's like, hard skills are very important. Soft skills are things that we need to know. At this point in the world, I think it's flipped around. I think soft skills have become the hard skills that we actually need to absolutely prioritize. Being able to have a difficult conversation, being able to delegate information or delegate work, being able to just socialize with people in a work environment, being able to recognize and self-regulate when I'm out of whack and I'm not, in my best position. How do I know what that feels like? Do I have the EQ available for me to show up differently or to apologize? And that's all soft skill, So soft skill at this point has become, such a key indicator of success to where your business is going. And if we don't focus on it, we're probably gonna come up short.
Yeah. And you know what I have seen as well is it usually, if you think of a topic like EQ, and I think, as you said, so important nowadays, is also the shift of that's not only part of, let's say, a leadership development program, but it's something that we actually give for the whole organization, because all of us need to have that option or skill to self-regulate, to know what's happening, to understand what's the feeling, what is that emotion telling you, what can I do and learn. I mean, learn from that emotion. But then also, as you say, yes, to have that social interaction, to have the empathy, to deal with people. I mean, whenever I think of quiet quitting, just to add on to the soft skill, and it links back again to how do you form relationships of trust? Because for me, it still boils down to let's have that foundation, let's have that trust relationship going, because it's really the start. And what I have noticed is that some managers and leaders are not very consistent in their behavior. And a direct link back to how EQ, how socially aware or self-aware am I? But that inconsistency is damaging the working relationship. And again, that might be one of the reasons why someone in your team might be a quiet quitter. It might be that we do have the flexibility in place, but yeah, my relationship with him is harming that. And I think, again, that is why we spoke about understanding the employee, but having the compassion and care, and again, building the trust in the end.
And again, at that point you just made to building trust and having that consistency. One of the top human needs that we have as humans is certainty. We want to know that we are certain with, I have a certain type of relationship with you. I am certain that, this is my expectation. This is your expectation. I have certainty.
Yeah.
And when someone is inconsistent, you're really giving them reasons to mistrust you.
Yeah.
If you're not showing up, and it speaks to the same old the NLP presupposition that we have around looking at congruency. What you say and what you do it must be aligned, right? And you can't say it here and then you don't do it, because people, like, that's the quickest way for people to disrespect you and not trust you, because you're the one saying it but you're not actually actioning it.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to that core values conversation that you spoke about earlier, right? It's like we have these values that they're wonderfully up on the wall, but completely incongruent because nobody lives those values.
Yeah.
So I think soft skills has such a major role to play in this quiet quitting, and it could be a real tool in your toolbox that, like, if you don't have the skills right now, guys, you phone Anja and myself and we'll come fix it.
Yeah, and Kevin, what comes to mind for me again is that you mentioned about the skill of having a difficult conversation. And once again, just that small point of, I was facilitating a conversation between a manager and the group of employees. And it was not a difficult conversation to manage, but it's so sad to see that there was not communication. And if you think of quiet quitting and you think about involving the people, so we might do a survey, perhaps an anonymous surveys, perhaps a dipstick survey to hear what they're doing. But then do you actually go the extra mile and involve them, provide them with the feedback, hear what's their views, and not trying to come up with the solutions? So again, just making them part of the solution and not trying to solve it yourself.
And Anja, with that said, I think they want to hear it from the CEO. They want to hear it from the managing director. They don't want to hear it from the manager. They don't want to hear it from the senior manager. They want to hear it from the actual head of the actual business that says, you are important, you matter. What are the problems? What are the qualms? How can we work at this? They want to hear it from the head downwards. And if it comes from anywhere else, you may as well not do it, because it almost becomes redundant.
Yeah. And I think that is, again, why I love that concept of self-leadership, simply because if you're in a current role and you are unhappy, have the courage to speak up. And at least talk about that. As you say, in the South African environment, there might not be 10 jobs waiting for you. What I do know is that the people overseas want the South Africans because of our work ethic. But at least have the courage to speak up, start that conversation. If it's not coming from the manager, take ownership yourself and say, but this is what's not currently working for me. Can we have a conversation around that? And
So I mean, I'm just gonna. I mean, they're giving us some tips here from Forbes, which is really cool. So, and you can add to it if you've got something to add to it. But if you're finding yourself thinking about quiet quitting, here are some of the tips for you to stop that. And like to your first point, be direct, set clear boundaries and expectations with your manager, right? Because then they know, right? The next one is be positive. Frame your boundaries in terms of what you're doing rather than what you're not doing, right? Focus on outcomes and not input. This one I think is such a big thing because people still have that, and that's again with that paradigm shift. People still want to see that you're sitting at your desk, which means you're busy.
Yeah.
And you don't even know what they're busy with. As long as you can see them, then you think that they're busy, right? And that doesn't help because outcomes far outweigh input,
Exactly.
right? The other one that they speak to here is cultivate work friendships, right? And I think that's important because it speaks to social intelligence. And when you have that social intelligence to create an environment where you actually like going to, you'll show up differently. You'll come differently. You'll come to that space differently. And you'll be because you know that you've cultivated some relationships. You would show up differently for them. They speak about be proactive. Don't wait to be told what to do. Look for opportunity to create value. At any given chance that I can get people to do this is to say, stop waiting for people to give you an instruction. What people are waiting for, what leaders are waiting for, is for those people who are wanting to get to the next step or wanting to make a difference to that environment to come back and say, listen, this system you've got here doesn't work. This system I'm working on works 100%. Can we change it? Yeah. That's what people are looking for because leaders simply don't have all the answers. They just don't.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just perhaps one thing, it reminds me of the stories that we're telling ourselves. And remember when you spoke about the silos, I'm the victim and you the villain. And the story that or the example that you've just used, people being in action and not wanting to do something is, I'm helpless. And for us to edit those stories and say, but I'm not helpless. I can actually speak up and I can come with a suggestion. They might not think it's the best one, but at least I did my part to be part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last two that they say, and we know this, is try and achieve a win-win. Having a win-win in any form of formation, whether it be with a manager, with a colleague, it creates collaboration. And when you're creating that win-win constantly and becomes a part of the DNA of how you do work in itself, it already creates a different approach to your actual work environment. And the last one, update your resume and start networking. I think networking, that's what I do all the time. I'm constantly speaking to people. I'm constantly meeting people. I'm constantly, and if it's just, even when it's when people say no, or they're not interested, or they don't care, then I'm like, okay, cool. There's other people that will, right? And so for me, constantly out there making new connections and telling people who I am and what I do all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, they say your network is your net worth. Yeah. And I think it's an example there. So Kevin, there's just two that I would like to add, and perhaps those are more from the employer's perspective. But again, the importance of the focus of employee experience. We've spoken so much about that. But if I am part of your team, how am I experiencing all these different important touch points? So perhaps if it's a new employee, it might be the onboarding process. Or if I'm a first time, the first year, how did the performance review go, and how was that conversation, or the first increase, or the first pay slip? So that employee experience critical. Even if you think of offboarding, how do I exit the organization, and what's that experience like? And then the other one is, even though we might have touched on that, but I would say an intentional focus on supporting burnout, supporting perhaps mental health issues, because the burnout stats that I have seen is 7 out of 10 people feeling burnout. And then how do we support them to actually become at a point where they can work optimally again?
Absolutely. Guys, thank you, Anja. That was fantastic. I love this conversation. I love this. I always love our conversations, and that's a quiet quitting, a wonderful phenomenon that we are experiencing right now. In aim of supporting South African brands out there, African Brand Architects is a full turnkey brand management agency that delivers all the brand building products and services you need under one roof, from strategic direction, creative design, product development, product promotion, digital and product support services. African Brand Architects is a one-stop shop for managing your brand. You can connect with them on www.africanbrandsarchitects.com. And the information will be in the description box below. Anja van Beek, thank you for joining me for this quiet quitting conversation today. I absolutely love that. Guys, if you want to know more about Anja, her links and everything are also in the links below. And Anja, I can't wait for you to be back next month and chatting with our next topic.
Yeah, looking forward to our next conversation. Thank you for the invitation, Kevin. Have a lovely day.
You too.
Goodbye.
Cheers for now. Bye-bye.